Hardcore Lies.
Hey guys, Rob from Georgia here with you. I'm your Wednesday night host of BodyBags, and it is week 318. And I bring you from 1972 another Lucio Fulci classic. But perhaps this is the classic film, the classic Giallo film, and perhaps, just perhaps, he outbested the maestro himself, that is Dario Argento. But, well, film is subjective, right? So, but in 1972, Lucio would direct a film called Don't Torture a Duckling. And I was about 2 years old when this film came out, right? But this is the Arrow release that I just recently picked up, really cheap. Now this is in fact okay for U.S. consumption. I got it on U.S. Amazon, and so you know this is not one of those region-free deals where you pick it up on Amazon UK or whatnot. But it is only like $20. It is double. It's a DVD, Blu-ray. It's got a book and it's just loaded with tons of stuff in there. And so this is the Arrow, right? So Don't Torture a Duckling, Lucio Fulci, 72. Florinda Bolkan will play Marsaria. I'm probably saying it wrong, but she is like the local wannabe witch, right? Barbara Bouchet, Patricia, she is sort of she's the character that sort of comes from out of town. She's rehabbing from drug scandal and whatnot. She's got some other issues as well. Tomas Milian as Martelli. He is the journalist who will be on scene in town. He'll become a major character. Irene as Mother Aurelia. She also will play a very, very important role towards the end. Principally, that's a good, tight piece of your cast. I'm purposely leaving off another name. For those of you familiar with this film, you know who I'm leaving off, of course. But this is Fulci, right? And this is the Arrow copy. And this was a first-time watch for me. And as I've said in other reviews of Fulci films, I'm, just continually growing deeper and deeper in just admiration for this man and what he is able or was able to have created in his lifetime. This film is no exception. And, so I just want to spend a few minutes. Now, this is Giallo, right? So I don't really want to get into things that potentially might make it upsetting for someone out there who has never seen this film before but decides, you know what, maybe it's time I see this film. And I stayed away from this film for a long time. Certain things you hear about this film. Children being killed and potentially you're not sure one way or another, but, sometimes spoilers get out there in terms of who the killer may or may not be. And, it's an unsettling film. Films like this are not meant to be enjoyable. Maybe outside looking in, we can admire Fulci for his boldness, to not be afraid to suggest certain things or whatnot, or show certain things. This is the first film that will highlight some of his boldness in terms of special effects. In fact, a scene in here that will really work as a preface to another scene that we are much familiar with in The Beyond that opens that film up will be here in this film. And then actually there's a scene towards the end that will sort of preface an opening scene to his next film, The Psychic. So there's a lot going on here in terms of him beginning to take first steps. And, but man, Don't Torture a Duckling. Let's just get this out of the way. It has been said that really Fulci was probably dealing with at least three, but he's dealing with a lot of things. One, the insularity of that can happen in small towns that can create the kind of prejudice and make allowance for them to kind of turn in on one another, right? This idea of rural versus urban, and this idea that perhaps the modernized people in the urban setting perhaps have left the superstitions that are still embraced in the rural communities. That sort of North Italy, South Italy is sort of put to test here in this film as well. And, of course, you have potentially the established church in Rome and its teachings come front and center. But let me just make this clear. I had this, I'm watching this movie, and as I'm watching this movie, I start to have some similar thoughts that I had when, not so long ago when I was revisiting Apocalypse Now. I found myself in the midst of that film saying to myself, this is not, at least on the surface, this is not intended to be a anti-Vietnam War movie. There are other things happening underneath, things that are not so visible on the surface. And I do happen to have the edition of that film that has Coppola's commentary, and he says as much, that there is much more going on in that film than this simple notion that, well, this is just an anti-war statement or anti-Vietnam War statement. I felt the same way watching this movie. I thought to myself, this is not simply just, now I'm going off of things that I had heard, things that I had read, or the people talk about this film. I'm thinking to myself, this is not an anti-Catholic film. This is not an anti-religion film. There are other things in this film that are going much deeper. There is some complexity going on here, and it's not just a simple, straightforward, well, this is Fulci's shot across the bow of the Catholic Church, such as his shot across the bow and the cat in the brain when it comes to the psychology, psychologist. He was shooting across the bow. He was making a statement there. In this film, it's much more complex than that. And Troy Howard, who had written So Deadly, So Perverse, 50 Years of Italian Giallo Films, said as much in the commentary that the popular myth is that this film is anti-Catholic. And that is not, or ought not to be seen quite like that. There's other things going on. In fact, he mentioned that, he believed Fulci to be a believer, but in the sense that he struggled with the church and its teachings, aspects of those teachings that he thought were very perverse teachings that had gone wayward. And so, if anything, he's shooting, a shot across the bow in terms of that, perhaps. Excuse me. But there are other things happening in this film in terms of the level of corruption. I think, I walk away from this film and I'm thinking to myself, again, like Cat in the Brain or other films that he does, there's this notion about being self-reflective, looking in the mirror, not being afraid to look in the mirror and see who we are, and if there's something wrong with us, not being afraid to acknowledge that and change it if we can, that we all might be better, right? And there is plenty of debauchery and sin to go around in this movie. In fact, when it comes to the welfare of these children, now the plot basically is in this small rural Italian southern village. Children end up being found dead. There is a child killer in the midst of this community, and it's turning the community upside down. But in some ways, this community is already upside down in terms of some of the things that are happening in here. But the fact that you have somebody in their midst that are killing these children really pushes this community to the boundaries where we will see, in effect, this one scene in particular where there's one character who's brought, and there's not the only one, but there's one character that's brought to the center, into the spotlight in terms of, well, this has got to be the killer, we've got the killer, but then they realize that no, we don't, and they let the person go. It doesn't take long for some vigilantism to kick in, and that is an extremely powerful, very rough scene to watch. This absolute torture and beatdown of this character, because they've taken the law into their own hands, and they think, well, irregardless, it is, it isn't, we don't need this person in our community anymore. And which is funny, the character in question is seen to be someone who, relishes in, say, the black arts, black magic, whatnot. They're just sort of a wannabe person in this. They don't really, I don't know how much they really take themselves serious, although when pushed, they do believe that what they've done, there's something they will do in the film what they've done is helped bring about the demise of these poor children for another reason. I want to steer as much clear as away as I can. But really what you have is these children are being killed. There is a killer in midst, and this town is being turned inside out, upside down, lashing out at one another. And we kind of get this sort of view of this, of these people that are so. It really is how you see this film, or as you begin to watch this film, you can't allow the very end conclusion to be the end of all ends here. In terms of, well, there you go. That was the final Fulcian say of this film. This is what he was. No, there are so much going on in this film. And it is, I think, again, meant to be self-reflective in this sense. And there's a lot of things going on. It is a very, very, very complex film if you allow it to be. It isn't just something as simple as, well, you know, this is what Fulci had set out to do. Nobody knows exactly what Fulci set out to do except for Fulci himself. And but film is subjective, and sometimes you make a film aimed at a specific thing at that moment, but then say 20, 30 years later, that film perhaps offers so much more to the people in that time period looking at it, considering the, you know, the things that they have surrounding them in their lives at that point. That is the power of film, right? So all that to say is, if you've never seen this movie, Don't Torture a Duckling, it is a supreme masterpiece of giallo. Some of the best red herrings I've ever seen in a film. Again, the complexity of the writing, just where Fulci wants us to go in terms of what we're thinking in the film. It isn't just as simple as the popular myth that has been laid out there may suggest. I challenge you to revisit this film and look at it in a different way. Consider there's a lot of things going on here. One that ought to maybe, I don't know, cause us to think a little bit about, I don't know, just people in general, I guess, and how we ought to be versus how we are at times. It's an interesting film. It's an unsettling film, and there's some imagery in this film that is very hard at times to take in. My wife watched most of it with me, and it was very unsettling to her. But in the end, we both sat there and thought about, or said some things out loud to each other that I wonder is actually said aloud. I mean, with people who sit and watch this movie. So, I mean, I guess my main thing is, definitely check it out or revisit it and do it and just really take in the full effect from the very opening shots, the very opening scene, all the way through to what would be the midpoint, and then of course, you know, on your way to the end conclusion of this film. Consider just how much Fulci was possibly saying in 1972, and it is only the second one, giallo, that was filmed filmed and took place in Italy. So I mean, there is some social comment going on, definitely some political comment, some religious comment. I mean, there's a lot of comment, and it is not just you know, narrowly defined one specific thing. He's commenting, I think, on a lot of things. But some of this discussion is better served for a podcast or some other thing and not here. But I did enjoy it in terms of just watching one of my favorite directors do it again. And that is impress the freaking crap out of me. And I'm telling you, Fulci is, yeah, he's Fulci, right? And so, Don't Torture a Duckling, 1972. Arrow released this thing. You can get it regular U.S. Amazon for only like $20. And I do believe my Bills are playing a pretty important game today against New England. I have no idea what's going on in that game. I've instead decided to do this review now. And at some point I'll check in and see what's going on. But so as always, we leave these things off with Go Bills.